Welcome back to DIVEBOMB IndyCar podcast as we reflect on IndyCar hitting the streets of Washington DC for the first time for the one and only Freedom 250 as Carl Kirkwood was victorious for the second time in 2026, adding to his success on one of the other new street races this year on the streets of Arlington. Longest street race in IndyCar history. So there's a lot to reflect on up and down the field, and a very one and done weekend is what it was being billed as throughout the event. And obviously the spectacle of the US Capitol building in the background, the Washington Monument, and IndyCar having the opportunity to hit Washington DC. So very condensed weekend, being our second 2-day street course weekend once again. But it was very fitting, I think, in the end that an American won the Freedom 250 races.
Yeah, it was a pretty surreal weekend, really, and it obviously ended with what was an extremely long race. You kind of got to lap 100 and you were thinking, all right, yeah, we must nearly be there. Only to have like a third of the race still to go. You basically had another hour. I mean, it came to the best part of 3 hours, really. So it was a proper marathon race. I know Kirkwood, after his win, kind of spoke about the fact he almost had to enter that endurance mindset he'd had from racing in some of the big endurance races in IMSA. So yeah, it was a mad weekend. Like seeing IndyCar in that setting was quite something. So yeah, we're left with a lot to unpack, but an American winner, as you say, and Kirkwood was well worth it. That was a real spectacular performance across the entire weekend, really.
And I guess we might as well go straight in with it with Carl Kirkwood, because we know that he is the king of the street courses, even he says he doesn't want that title, but ultimately it keeps on circling back to him for a reason, because I believe it's now 6 of his 7 career victories have all taken place on street courses. And we saw it at Arlington, the other new street course earlier this year. We saw kind of general form at Andretti Global at Markham last week, that they just hit the ground running on these new street courses. And this was more similar to kind of your Arlington, as well as what you kind of see in places like Detroit and Long Beach, where it's a lot bumpier. Obviously, Markham's kind of was paved prior to the weekend. This was very bumpy, very your traditional downtown street where your damper program is very, very important to kind of ride those bumps and deal with that. And this was really a very Kirkwood Andretti style street circuit. And it was clear from the off that they were going to be one of the ones to be. Obviously, qualifying was extremely close with Alex Palou. I think we'll briefly touch on that, the one-car format once again, because I know we've got some thoughts on it. But race day was just dominant, start to finish. Obviously, you got Palou at the start, impressive move around the outside on the opening lap, and literally didn't look back from there. Like, it felt like at no time he was really, really pressured at all. Yes, McLaughlin tried that move at him on the restart, but that all went a little bit pear-shaped from McLaughlin. But it just felt Kirkwood was in such control. He just kept on building all these gaps. And as we've seen often before on street courses, he just looked a class apart throughout the entire race. And obviously, Palou had his own mishaps, which we'll get on today. To a very rare off weekend for Palou, but it doesn't really take away from. I don't think Palou would have beaten Kirkwood. Just how impressive Kirkwood was. He was just a complete step apart from the rest of the field, and very, very deserving winner.
You mentioned it at the top there, Dan. I think this certainly wasn't good for his dislike of the anointment as the king of the streets. And I mean, he has become a very well-rounded force, but this was still, ruthless on street course. I mean, his record on street course is incredible. 7 career wins now, 6 of those still having come on street courses. I think I saw a stat that he's won actually 6 of the last 18 street races. So it's a pretty impressive record, that, since joining Andretti in 23. You might want to fact check me there, but that's what I read anyway. I didn't go on my way to check it because I only saw it briefly. But yeah, he was a bit irked, Kirkwood, by the fact he'd crashed out the previous weekend in Markham. It was a rare error, really, given he has become, over the past 3 years particularly, such a reliable and consistent force. And that had missed the opportunity for Andretti to possibly lock out the podium in Markham. And this was just the perfect rebound, because it was so dominant from start to finish in the race, really. Across the entire weekend, it was, I think, clinical is one word that I would use. Like, qualifying has been a little bit of a struggle, just getting the job done when it mattered for Kirkwood, points in the last year or so, I would say, but executed perfectly on the front row, clean road ahead, and so decisive he was off the start to pass Palou, which he said was actually not necessarily his intention. Like, he was wanting to play the long game, but obviously the opportunity arose and he put it around the outside in turn 2, and that was brilliant. And from there, he really commanded that early part of the race. Obviously, it helped that Palou was removed from the equation, obviously with his penalty, but Kirkwood, I think, as you say, probably would have had the edge anyway, looking at how the early part of the race was panning out. And we had traffic became a factor at one point, but I think how he dealt with that was really the marker of the just ruthless efficiency that he was driving with. Because, the first time he caught traffic, he caught 4 very quick cars, like cars that had been stuck in a bit of strife at points in the race. You had Rasmussen, who was racing up front, Armstrong likewise, O'Ward, who's obviously quick, Foster, who had been the car to beat the previous weekend. So just got through them so seamlessly. McLaughlin ends up getting stuck there, and I nearly said Palou. It was like Palou, the way that he then drew out, and he was leading by 15 seconds at one point heading into the final stops, and it really was a beatdown until obviously the adversity of the late restarts. It was heads up really to avoid McLaughlin's pretty audacious lunge, and then the subsequent restart he was just composed and never really came under threat from Lundgaard. So it was a hugely well-deserved win, and I would argue one of, if not the most complete weekend we've really seen from any driver this season.
He's definitely getting an A+ in Grey Book this week, too, so there's a spoiler if you read that later this week. But they say this was kind of the event you really wanted to win outside the Indianapolis 500. Kirkwood was one of the ones who made it clear this is not like the Indianapolis 500. This is a very different event. And on the drivers, I think Palou was one actually who was like, yeah, this is like comparable from kind of the spectacle and the fact you want to win it. It was very much on the side of nope. Indianapolis 500 is his own thing, albeit this is very cool and you still do want to win this.
Kirkwood did add, to be fair, that, he kind of said all of this after qualifying and stood firm, I think, with those beliefs, but he did say that actually he woke up on race morning and his heart was racing in a way that it only does on those very special days and only really does at Indy. So it was clear that this was a big deal. I don't think he was underplaying what a big deal it was, but as an American, I think especially when you look at the eruption of emotion afterwards, the botched attempt at a burnout or a donut, and he was ecstatic and said that this was probably the most satisfying win of his career, maybe on a par with his first win in Long Beach, but also possibly usurping that, given just the meaning and the fact that, this is, even if the event does end up returning, as some of the key players outside of IndyCar wish to happen, like this is, he's going to be the only winner of the Freedom 250, regardless of what happens going forward. So yeah, I think this is going to be something that stands the test of time within Kirkwood's resume as a properly big deal.
I do briefly want to touch on this because there's been a lot of talk. Can Kirkwood close the championship out to Palou now? The gap's close to 91 points because there was a 42-point swing. No, let's just end that conversation here and there. Like, he's got 3 races to go. He's got I worked this out. He's got to average podium races and hope Palou is a complete disaster, including at the track he should have won at last year and the track he's just dominated for like 3 or 4 years straight. It's like, the conversation's annoying me. That's what I'm going to say. It's like, Palou's basically still got a 2-race gap. It's going to take him not to turn up for Kirkwood to have it, like, even hope. Even that's pretty far-fetched. So, yeah, I just wanted to make that abundantly clear. This podcast is not going to be speaking about Kirkwood making a championship push because it's not happening. Like, we came into the weekend with Palou still mathematically able to win the title. When you're kind of at that point, it's not really a championship battle, is it? And short over package has been better for Andretti, but Milwaukee's never been one which has been outstanding for them. So yeah, not happening. We're ending that conversation after Archie makes his point because it's just something that riled me up yesterday. I was really emotional over this, but no, it's just not a conversation that doesn't need to be had.
I guess in some ways you want to try and hype up the close to the season because you're not going to say, I guess from a broadcast perspective, the championship's done. There's no point tuning into the final few races. Like, they're going to want to sell it, I guess is the point. But I think, just to briefly segue on to Palou's disaster day, I think he said afterwards that he was actually kind of happy that all of these things just happened at once. Like, it was like 4 years of nothing particularly going wrong, just all crammed into one of the most disastrous days we've really seen from Palou. Obviously, gets that drive-through penalty early for clipping Mick Schumacher's tyre. Like, it can happen. It was a pretty tight out of his box in that pit lane, and it was just unfortunate. But then, obviously, to have the botched pit stop as well, where his left front isn't tied up, and then, the crash was an interesting one because he actually said that he'd hit the wall about 20 laps earlier, and the toe link had just failed when it happened. So, yeah, it was funny because when Alex Palou crashes out, and it's the second weekend in a row he's crashed, by the way, after his Markham qualifying incident. But it feels like it should be really consequential, yet this felt just, apart from in the race, like bringing a caution that drew everything back together and created some jeopardy for Kirkwood, it just felt so inconsequential because he was already in this unusual position of being a lap down. Like, it was quite striking, really, that, you know, in that first stint of the race, Palou had been pursuing Kirkwood, and then, yeah, within a kind of instant, really, it had flipped and he was pursuing Kirkwood to get back onto the lead lap. And it was, I mean, it was a novelty. So, yeah, just drink it in, all of those who dislike Palou's success, because you're not going to be seeing this very often. And I think we will come away from the Milwaukee weekend with a champion still, because 91 points is seismic, even though it looks nothing compared to 133.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do have a small hope for just statistical reasons that the title gets taken to Laguna Seca, but even then, Kirkwood's still got to gain 19 points a race or something. It's crazy. So it's still far-fetched.
I don't want to be in a position where we go to Laguna Seca having the caveat of Palou just needs to start the race, because that's really boring.
But, yeah, and then they have to do the promotional shoots of Kirkwood just standing there, like hoping.
Yeah, actually, that might be
Palou
quite
just
amusing.
doesn't turn up. That would be quite. That might be the moment of the year if we have a scenario where Palou's like 52 points ahead coming to Laguna, and all he has to do is turn up to be the champion. But Kirkwood's got like 2 days full of photo shoots, the Astor Cup, like he's got a chance of winning it. That would be quite amusing, actually. We'll reflect on that post Milwaukee if it happens. But I'm mad that to happen. But it would take, was it 2 years ago? Palou pretty disastrous race at Milwaukee when he didn't have the start. That would have to happen again, basically, realistically.
I think just to round off Palou, obviously this was a disaster race day, but he did take his 7th pole of the season, which is now his personal best tally, usurping last year's. That is now obviously 7 poles in 15 races this year, but in the last 32 races stemming back to the start of last year, that's now 13 poles. He had only 6 in 5 years in 81 races before the start of last year. I think I worked this out. It was 7% of his races from the first 5 years he'd had pole. He's now been on pole for 40% of the last, basically since the start of 2025, which is, I mean, it's astounding when obviously people were heading into last year already kind of talking about the fact that, yeah, this guy doesn't really have any chinks in his armor. Yet it lays bare, doesn't it, how that single lap pace, while he'd always been very consistent at getting to the latter end of qualifying, has just taken that notch up to be above and beyond the most consistent and quickest qualifier in the series. It's statistically, it's absolutely astounding.
And I will again briefly touch on Palou. Like, I won't obviously repeat instances that you said. Like, he does have a few of these per year. I think people over exaggerate how faultless Palou is. He does have a couple of pretty bad races every year. This was his one annual absolute catastrophe. What is different to last year? It feels different to last year. It's kind of, when he's not winning, he's not on the podium. Like, he's had 3 finishes outside the top 15 so far this year now, and I think his points is probably quite a bit less compared to what it was a year ago. Obviously, the gap was closed quite significantly to, I mean, I can't remember the gap that Palou had at the end of last year, but obviously Kirkwood's closed it quite a lot now with a kind of 40-point swing there. So kind of, yeah, Palou's having a few more pretty bad days, and the days he's not winning, he's not coming second or third like he has been in previous seasons. Is the only difference. Like, I guess from a future competitiveness standpoint, it gives you a little bit of hope if Kirkwood and Andretti or Malukas or somebody can start piecing it together a little bit more. But I mean, his qualifying lap was ultra impressive once again. He's really nailed one qualifying in comparison to some others. Like, wherever he seems to line up, he feels like he maximizes it. Not even if he's taken pole like Arlington, he was in the least favorable position and still qualified second, and Long Beach qualified third in the end there. So he's really nailed this qualifying format for whatever reason. It's just something else I've kind of picked up. Like, he nails a lot of stuff, but compared to some other people, kind of the way he switches on these tires and gets a lap done is pretty impressive, I've noticed.
Yeah, that pole margin was almost 0.6 of a second. So, I mean, it was an incredible lap. I think it's probably a good time, actually, while we're on that, just to touch on our grievances with the single car format, because that's obviously the last time we're going to see that in qualifying this year. Markham, it didn't happen because of the condensed day. And I know you share this sentiment, Dan. I just don't think it's worked. Like, I actually find it just purely less competitive, therefore less exciting than the traditional 6-minute, really fast-paced, everyone fighting against each other at the same time to get their laps in. This is just, it drags on a bit. You have the silly commercial break in the middle that kind of disjoints it all. I just don't think it's worked. Maybe you can revamp it some way to make it properly really quick shootout, because I think there's perks to the pressure of it, the jeopardy, obviously showcasing each car's lap rather than kind of being off board for every lap and not seeing everyone's work in that fast six session in the traditional format. I just think it's been, it's supposed to be more exciting. I think it's just been genuinely sizably less exciting than the normal format, if I'm being honest. I just don't think it's worked.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a few problems with it. I think I said this, that after the ad break, those who go after the ad break, they've got another 5-10 minutes of their cars being cooled down even further, which makes warming up their tyres take even longer. The gaps in qualifying are just ridiculous. Like, it's literally half a second in between cars. It takes too long for me. And they're like, oh, the suspense of, the single lap ones, the pressure, as you say, and kind of the build-up of it makes it more exciting, more dramatic, a better watch. I don't think it does. Like, I think seeing one car cross the line straight after another is pretty entertaining. And the way the gaps are, I just don't find it very entertaining. The other thing that really gets on my nerves is there's no way of tracking where they are. You're just having to believe the broadcast saying, oh, they're ahead, oh, they're behind. Like, there's no sector times. There's no splits of any sort. There's no live tracking in comparison to it. You just kind of find out where they are when they cross the line, which I think as a viewer is way worse than what you get in the normal Fast Six, where you can see their delta as they go along. They have the technology, so I don't see why it's not being transferred into these normal or into these one single lap shootout sessions. I just think that's a bit bizarre, and it makes quite a hard watch, especially when it's drawn out so much. So yeah, like you said, for me, it just hasn't worked. I find the other format more entertaining, more intense, and just better as a viewer. And the qualifying margins are a lot closer. Like, Malukas just hit the wall and just decided he was going to give up because he didn't want to risk anything, knowing that he would qualify last. And that's not, someone trundling 20 seconds off the pace is not a good viewership spectacle. So, and Rasmussen was like the hero of the day. All he did was beat Armstrong and Malukas, who was trundling round that far off the pace because that was the only storyline they had when he was going last.
Yeah, I agree. I think the sector time and showing the split after each sector, now that they are kind of putting an emphasis on sectors quite often, I'm not sure why we're not seeing that. I'm not sure if that's just an international thing. I don't think it is. I think I don't know. I think that would make it a lot better from a viewership standpoint, because it is really hard to follow when you're literally just relying on what Fox are saying, and then at the end of the lap, it pops up that they're 0.7 of a second slower. Like, at least show us as the lap's going on, rather than kind of building up. Not even building up fake suspense. It's really hard to follow. And I don't know if I've ever aired this on here. I'm also not a fan of the ghost car. Like, I'm saying this like you need a way to track and follow. I actually think the ghost car too often kills the suspense. I think there needs to be a happy medium, and I think that should be done by just having a delta or something. I think the ghost car is too interferes too much. I don't know whether you have any takes.
It also doesn't look very good. Like,
no,
I think it doesn't track very well.
No, I agree. Like F1 doesn't have ghost cars, for instance, during their qualifying sessions. Like, they just use sector times and sector splits, and that is really the perfect way to do it, I would say. And they only show the ghost car like after the session for analysis, which I know IndyCar doesn't have a built-in window to have that sort of thing. But F1's ghost car kind of overlays the actual lap, rather than having kind of just an auto-generated thing that's kind of jumping around a little bit and looks not amazing. So that's just something I'd like to see improved a little bit.
But we're going to wrap off on Andretti Global. I think Will Power's the first one to touch on. A 5th third-place finish of the season, the 3rd consecutive third-place finish. He is absolutely glued to that position this year. But as I said with Kirkwood, it was just the type of track that really suited Andretti. And as I said last week, it feels like Power's really coming to form in the last couple of races. It just took a while for things to click at the start of the year. So errors on his side, errors on the team side, but it now feels like gelling together. One thing that he really noted was pit stops have kind of improved at this point in the season, and there's less errors on pit road, which are really, really helping. And he's not even qualifying very well. Like, he started 12th for the race, and
another error
in the last,
like he hit the wall again.
Same as Ericsson, actually. Obviously, Ericsson hit the wall as well. They both had. It was quite funny in the onboards. Like, within about 10 seconds of each other, we both saw both Andretti's going down the straight with bent steering. But like he's done in the last couple of races, actually, it feels like he started the races off pretty slowly, and then kind of midway through, he's suddenly a really big threat for those podium positions and has really, really strong pace. So maybe that's because he's just starting to climb down the order, both at Markham and Washington, where you don't really pay attention to him for the first bits of the race. But yeah, Power's really coming into his own. Like if it was like that breakthrough win, might not come this season, but certainly they're in come the right foot next season to start off really, really well. And it's good to see after that very difficult start to the year. So yep, another just good weekend for all Power. They're really racking up now.
I'd kind of put him and Ericsson in the same bracket, really. Obviously, Ericsson finished fourth. It was a 1-3-4 for Andretti to back up the double podium that they had, obviously, in Markham, which, I mean, they probably would have had a similar result if Kirkwood had have stayed in that race in Markham as well. So they're just, as a collective, really hitting a groove. I know Ron Rzuski, their new team principal, obviously so many years at Penske, has kind of started to draw parallels as to what was so successful at Penske in terms of a really strong core of three drivers that work really well together. He also spoke about the pit stop deal that after Arlington, where it was just an absolute, I mean, it became a bit of a clown show on pit road, really. Every stop for every driver was having something go wrong. They had a kind of big inquest, and since then have just been putting in so much work to make sure they're executing. And we haven't really seen any blunders since then. So yeah, I'd say here, Power and Ericsson, who started basically at the back, having taken an engine penalty after qualifying, very similar days in terms of just seamlessly and very much like the way Kirk was driving in that kind of decisive manner, just really clinically making their way through the field. Obviously, Power started a little bit further up. It was quite amusing when Lundgaard said on the radio, where the hell did Will come from? As Power suddenly appears behind him, because they had such pace. I mean, it didn't always look super easy to overtake. There were only 155 on-track passes in 147 laps, which I know it sounds like an all right total, but it's only about one per lap, and that's not, that's counting passes on back marker traffic as well. So they were making passes happen where it wasn't necessarily super easy, even though there were like a fair amount of passing zones. And yeah, just all four of them are, and I know Kirkwood made the error the weekend prior, but all four of them are driving so well. That team is just delivering, obviously still on street courses. Obviously something's going right for them to be performing so well and winning all of the new street courses as well. But as we've spoken about, as a well-rounded package, they are in the best place they have been in an awfully long time. And I think Power is definitely at the core of that kind of restabilizing. I think there was obviously that bit of flux at the start of the year. It was natural with the big team change, but the potential was always there. They're just executing and delivering on that potential now. And as we've said the last few weeks, after his two prior third place finishes in this run, he just looks like he's having a blast. He looks really happy. He's driving freely. Same with Ericsson compared to, which is, a stark contrast to the 2 years prior. It's just really happy times at Andretti. They are, as a collective, by far the best, the most informed team at the moment. I don't think you can deny that.
Yeah, and it is a small sample size, but last three races, you've seen all three Andretti cars be really competitive. Like as a team, all three cars are competing towards the front. And yes, as I said, short sample size, but you're not seeing that with McLaren, even on a two-car race. You're not really seeing that with Ganassi. It's only really Pelot's performing week in, week out, and you're not really seeing it with Team Penske either. So, like, if they can continue this momentum into next year, they could be a real threat to Pelot's dominance, and they could pick up like a lot of victories. Sweeping new street courses, you said, that is very impressive, and the ground this team has made, it's been really impressive. And we spoke about this last week. I think Ericsson has credited Power to a lot of the kind of the setup work. And yes, Andretti have been strong on street courses, but they're also really coming along a road and roads, courses, and ovals as well. And their short oval packages are really improving. Going to be particularly prevalent when we get to Milwaukee. So yeah, if they can continue the momentum they've got, like Pelot's dominance might be under threat, and then we'll say it's next year and they'll win the first 8 races. But anyway, otherwise they might be.
I think it's going to be a telling final 3 races, given obviously all the talks and all the evidence that we've had that they've obviously improved on short ovals. The Milwaukee doubleheader is going to be big, and obviously Laguna Seca, where, to be fair, they've had a decent amount of success. Obviously Herta was always really good there, but they're chasing some genuinely really, really strong results in points. Ericsson's now up to 7th in the standings. He's only 15 points off Newgarden in 6th, which would match Ericsson's career best. And he's actually only 38 points behind O'Ward in 5th. And then you kind of get to Malukas in 4th. I think 4th's probably a long shot, but there's a slight chance you could look at Marcus Ericsson ending the season really well. He's obviously shown so well on ovals at points this year. He could finish top 5 in points, which would be quite a comeback, really, because he was ailing a little bit from a championship standing at the start of the year. But again, just evidences the real step forward that he's made, obviously, that came to a T with his Markham performance. But Power as well is now into the top 10, which I mean, it kind of felt an inevitability. Obviously, it's a shame Rinus VeeKay crashed out, and that's really harmed his efforts to finish in the top 10 in points. But I think it was kind of a formality that Power would get there anyway. So, yeah, they are, I mean, at the moment, looking like all three cars could finish in the top 10 in points. And Penske actually have three cars in the top 10 as well. But I think you are looking at them ending the season as the best collective.
And I guess on Team Penske, they had a pretty chaotic day across all three of their cars. It's only right to start off with Scott McLaughlin, who was the closest guy to Kirkwood to challenge for victory for come the second half of that race. And he made the bold move on that restart. Ultimately, from going to the barrier, whilst watching it, I could just see him go up the inside. I just knew that was going to end up in the barrier. But felt like one of those days where you only get one shot at winning this race, and this is a race that you're going to kind of go down and not quite Indy 500 in mortality, but kind of that standard of this guy won the Freedom 250. And for McLaughlin, I think this race means a lot, becoming an American citizen in the last couple of years, and I think that means a lot to him. Like, he's really embraced coming over to America, and yeah, you get one shot to win it. He had to go for it, and I think that was very much his mindset towards this. Like, he's not really fighting for anything in this season. Like, it's not like he's making decisions for a championship in mind. So he might as well go for victories, especially when he is in such a long drought. It hits 2 years as we go to Milwaukee next weekend. So yeah, you can see why I did it. But I mean, I guess outside of that, it was a good weekend, one of the better weekends I've seen from him in a while. Like, it feels like he hasn't quite been, like, even weekends we're finishing in the top 10, it feels like he's kind of a bit nowhere, not quite competing for victory. But obviously this was a very different occasion. Qualified third pretty comfortably and was kind of just comfortably doing his own business in the top 5 for the entirety of the race. Obviously didn't have the pace that Kirkwood did, couldn't quite get through traffic as well as he usually did. But as I said, once the opportunity opened, he just had to go for it. And yeah, this occasion didn't pan out. Win the streak continues. I mean, Milwaukee's obviously going to be a great shot, but I do wonder how much is playing on his mind. Like, when his contract comes up at the end of next year to Penske, you know, do they still have faith in him after not winning for so long and not kind of building on the momentum that we thought he'd have at the start of 2025? It's just been a bit flat. So yeah, that's just something that, you know, I've kind of seen a few more people speak about, like, you know, what does his future look like after being a bit quiet and not kind of having the highs that his teammates are having.
I think just on the point that you make about McLaughlin kind of being outshone by his teammates this year, which is valid. Obviously, Newgarden's had some exceptional oval performances, those couple of wins, and Malukas has kind of generally been the guy against the other two everywhere. I do feel like the last 2 weekends have been more reminiscent of McLaughlin from that form that we speak about often at the end of 2024. Like, there's been a sense he's just kind of rising to the top again into a little bit. Like, everything, we've spoken a lot this year, McLaughlin, about how obviously the changes that were made on his stand were quite destabilizing after continuity for a pretty long period of time. And I think maybe we are just starting to see some evidence of that clicking, because he has just looked much more competitive, especially comparative to his teammates as well these last couple of weekends. Like, this was a really good display. Like, he was properly in the fight. Well, I say he was properly in the fight. He maybe wasn't quite a match for Kirkwood, but he was there. That caution had brought him into the fight. But yeah, I do think, whether consciously or otherwise, the desperation of that 2 years without a win did kind of shine through a little bit with that lunge that he made on Kirkwood. It was audacious. It probably did look a bit desperate. Whether it was desperate or not, I don't know. But you are very correct, I think, that at this stage in the season, he's not really fighting for much in points. Okay, he looked certain for the podium all day, but did he care that much about a podium in this one-off really special event compared to this maybe being his only chance to go and take the lead and win this race? And win a race, as we say, after such a drought. I understand why he went for the move. I think he will be I don't think he'll be disheartened coming away from the weekend because of the level of performance being that bit better than what we've seen at times this season. Like, he is entering a little bit more of a consistent run, I feel now. Like, we are seeing a few more results, and it's kind of, you know, Newgarden again. Like, Newgarden finished 8th. I feel like that's kind of just been Newgarden's season, and at least McLaughlin here on a non-oval race is showing, like, there is, like, that seems to be Newgarden's ceiling. At least McLaughlin has now risen to show the ceiling is higher. Obviously, he showed it at the start of the season in St. Pete. And where else was McLaughlin on the podium? Was it Barber? He always seems to be on the podium in Barber.
Well, it's the age-old debate. He finished third at the Indy 500.
Oh, of course it was, yeah. Duh.
So it depends on how traditionalist you decide to be when we got another podium in it.
I think I just assume nowadays he's on the podium in Barber as well because he's so good there. But yeah, this was, in short, like this felt like a bit of a step forward, a bit more encouraging, and he'll be heartened by the performance, even if disappointed with the way that it ended, which I guess contrasts his teammate Malukas, who he seems to be in a bit of a down moment at the moment, which is strange because he's obviously had such a good year, and he has been even though he doesn't have the win to show for it, the cream of the crop at that team. And it was only a few weeks ago I was kind of thinking like just how content and happy he looks with everything. But a couple of bad weekends, and they were expected this year. I don't think anyone's begrudging him for it. Like, this was a proper baptism of fire of a season. It's just a shame that actually they've come at the end of the year to put a downer on what has been a great year. But he's just been very hard on himself. Like he said in his interview with Fox, like he doesn't know whether it's kind of mental or physical, this bad form. Like, I know the wrist has become an issue again since the crash in Nashville, so I don't know whether that's kind of leaning in a bit to some of the irritability that we're seeing here. But he's being very hard on himself, and I hope he just stops being so hard on himself, especially given Milwaukee provides a great opportunity to get that first win, I feel.
Well, I think he's been a bit like that all his career. He puts a lot of pressure on himself to succeed because that's naturally who he is. And I feel like we've seen this from him before. But you can see why he's a bit disappointed. It's been a rough stretch of races, the last two. Although we didn't really see his crash. Like, I kind of think we all assume he hit the inside wall and that catapulted him into the barrier. Like, we didn't actually see it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Like
but
it's strange because track with so many cameras. I don't know how there wasn't a camera looking at the entry of the corner so we could see what happened, really.
Yeah. But anyway, like, it was the second race in a row. He's seemingly made a pretty clumsy error, which has cost him a lot of points. Last weekend, he was obviously frustrated with the brake issues as well. So, yeah, look, he's had 3 tough weekends in a row, but as we've said many a time, this was kind of what we expected. And he is a guy who's just very hard on himself. And I do wonder, like, how much the Indy 500 does weigh on him, being that close. And, we've seen it before, Ericsson last year. That just kind of put him into a negative spiral for the rest of the year. No, I don't think it's the same with Malukas, but I do wonder if that kind of weighs on him a little bit at this point, as well as all the other close calls he's had to winning this year, and kind of he hasn't had his day in the sun yet. He's been so close, but there's always been somebody who's beaten him. So I just wonder if that's having a little bit of an effect on him. As you say, Milwaukee's going to represent a really, really superb chance for him to have his own day in the sun and finally find himself victorious. But that's a theory. Like I said, there's no way of telling. Like, you might be, it's a long stretch of races, so you can understand the physical element of it. A lot of very tough races as well, long races. But I think that's maybe what you could attest some of the mental side to at the very least.
I think it was always going to be an emotional roller coaster of a year, given, what a grand kind of dream opportunity this is. And that's something that Malukas hasn't really kind of shirked. Like, he's embraced it, really. But it was always going to be really heavy to kind of, obviously go from everything he's been through the past few years with the injury and returning and what have you, to then have this massive opportunity to fill such massive boots. I think it was always going to, take some sort of toll at some point. So I guess it's understandable in this late stage of the season if he is a little bit, I don't know whether drain's the right word, but I guess it just makes some sense. I just hope, I know this is who he is, but I just hope he isn't too hard on himself, because he's still 4th in points in his first year with Team Penske, and he's still in with a shot at finishing 3rd, maybe 2nd in the championship. I know he's about 50 odd points, 51, I think, behind Kirkwood now. But, whatever happens, he could crash out with the final 3 races, and I think we'd still be looking at this as a pretty impressive year.
And on Newgarden, it's the 6th time in 11 run street races he finished at the lower end of the top 10. So you're right.
Yeah,
that's kind of been. It was like a pretty quiet weekend. I will say, Archie will know this, I hated that livery, so I'm glad we're never going to see it again. Yeah. I just thought it was horrible.
This is better, not the livery, but this is better than we've seen in the last couple of years from Newgarden. Like, we weren't even seeing these races. So there is, I think it just kind of reflects a little bit more stability just in general. Yeah, there's consistency there.
he was kind of this guy on road street courses a couple of years ago you think could win a road street race on any given weekend. It never feels like that. It never feels like he'll get even a podium on a road street course race. One really crazy stat I saw is he hasn't reached a fast six this year, which is mental. Bonkers.
I know he's been limited a bit by the injury, obviously, and that's the other thing. Like, he's still just braking with whatever foot feels comfortable in whatever corner, which can't be easy. And I think you got to say this kind of more reliable run that he's been on, that considered, even if it is kind of lower end top tens, it's still pretty impressive. Like, this has been a proper battling year. I'm intrigued to see next year for Newgarden, where it does feel like everything's just kind of reset a little bit after a couple of years of him speaking a lot about needing resets. And obviously the ovals are a different kettle of fish, but just in terms of road and street courses, like, next year will be interesting. If he's fully fit, everything is a bit more reset. It's been a longer pattern, obviously, this road and street, not demise, but just not really factoring as much. So yeah, interested to see whether next year can bring that upturn. It's going to be one thing to watch, I think, because he's obviously so good on ovals that you can just make that click, and he's a championship contender again.
But that's it. I don't know, it's a very valid point, but he hasn't won a road and street course in 5 years. Obviously, St. Pete 24 is, a bit of a asterisk to that, but yeah,
I think maybe 4 years.
Let's briefly end off kind of the main storylines of Christian Lundgaard, who finished second once again for Aaron McLaren. It was actually a pretty decent weekend for Aaron McLaren, not superb, but Nolan Siegel, I think it is his best ever career result in sixth, so pretty good run for him. Christian Lundgaard, but so let's focus on Lundgaard just to start off with. It is his sixth podium of the year, moves him to third in points ahead of Malukas, and that was definitely the maximum that he could have done. There was no way he was going to get Kirkwood, but I guess did pretty well to defend from the Andretti's late on. Not like Power probably pretty comfortably getting the closing stages, but held him off and obviously took advantage of McLaughlin's own issues. And it's become a bit of a Lundgaard day, really. Like, you quietly just end up on the podium. Feels like that's kind of the maximum you're going to earn. Comfortably beat his teammates, and that's why he's probably going to go to Ganassi next year. Like, he's just so reliable on street courses. The Oval was obviously still needs some work, but that is we've crescented the Lundgaard day. Just a road and street course podium. Didn't really do anything, but just absolutely maximised that result. The
new Ericsson day. Like, it's always when he's qualified as well in that kind of 8th to 12th range. Like, he started 9th here, gets his way up to second. Like, he's good at making up those positions. Does well on the strategy, stays out of trouble. I suppose it's nice of Aaron McLaren to be rewarding one of the best seasons we've ever seen from one of their drivers with a probable seat at Ganassi. Like, that's very kind of them.
And definitely their intention. I don't really have anything else to say. Like, it was a good weekend for Lundgaard, and we'll speak about more in the 6-month off season, but I'm just fascinated to see how him and Palou are going to kind of line up against each other. Should they both be at Ganassi? Let's make that clear. You said at the same time as me. It's not confirmed yet, but that's what every report seems to indicate. And Nolan Siegel, worth touching on. Great weekend for him. I think that Archie might have to fact check me, but I believe that's his best result in IndyCar ever.
I can't think of anything better. I don't think he's ever had a top 5. So
yeah, and obviously he's still looking for his future. He's kind of fallen out of conversations a little bit in the last couple of weeks, but I feel like last few races he has generally looked a little bit more comfortable. Like, he started the season really badly, like awfully, but kind of feels like whilst I was taking a bit of a downturn, he's kind of picked up his form a little bit, and is, he's not necessarily getting results, but the actual performances seem to be quite a lot improved. That is his best ever career result, to make clear. So 6th place is his best ever career result.
Made the Fast 12 as well this weekend, which obviously that's kind of, that's obviously a good reflection of the pure pace that does exist. And like, this is what can happen if he knits a race day together. Like, and he took an engine penalty as well, I think. So obviously he was bumped down to 18th. So ends up gaining 12 positions. A pretty similar day, really, just to a bit of a lesser extent. And Kevin Simpson as well, finishing 5th. Like, he started down in 23rd. Because he had an incident in qualifying, and
he went off strategy pretty early on. Though I don't know, I can't remember Siegel's strategy. Simpson went off strategy pretty early on and basically just pumped out qualifying laps from that point, and that's how he finished 5th. But yeah, 2 good days for the 2 youngest drivers in the series. Pretty impressive runs.
Feels like this is becoming more familiar for Simpson as well. Like, I want to see more weekends where he's qualifying at the front and staying there, but that he can kind of have those strategies and execute and be making moves and standing up to basically whoever. And kind of even having the measure of Dixon, who, by the way, got his first top 10 since the IndyCar.
That was my running stat for ages.
Is astounding. Yeah, pretty good from Simpson.
Who is only 8 points behind Dixon in the championship, which is pretty interesting. I mean, Simpson seems to kind of have a couple of these days each year now, which we're getting pretty used to. So yeah, like he seems to be steadily improving every year, which is obviously really, really good to see. So yeah, credit to him. Whilst we're on McLaren, I mean, there was another disastrous road street weekend to Pato Ward. It is somehow still 5th in points. Qualified okay in 7th, but then was just kind of nowhere. Ward is really making a hash of starts and restarts this year. He's losing 2, 3, 4 positions on the opening lap every single race, it seems, and then he made a error going into the turn 6 chicane. I mean, he did a pretty good job not to throw it in the barrier because that car was all over the shop, but ended up finishing 16th, was a lap down. I think mainly because of his incident. He did 8 pit stops in the end. Rasmussen did 12 pit stops, which you don't quite know how that panned out. Obviously, he was involved in the VK Armstrong incident, which probably got a bit of damage. But how Rasmussen had 12 pit stops is quite remarkable.
I think while we're talking about Rasmussen and kind of that gaggle of Simpson-Siegel drivers, like Rasmussen, this was more evidence of what we really laid out when he got this new deal from Ed Carpenter Racing we needed to see. Obviously, qualifies 4th, which was his best qualifying effort in IndyCar. Like, this was a particularly good non-oval display from him, and he actually held his own in the race until Armstrong pulled off it was a pretty ridiculous move. I don't know what he was playing at, really. I mean, he wiped out Rasmussen, obviously then put VK in the wall as well. VK got himself to the front on the Simpson-like strategy, actually. He'd had a touch of the wall in qualifying VK, so started pretty far down the order. So, yeah, that was a mad one from Armstrong. He'd actually had a bit of a better weekend, Armstrong, to that point, qualifying 5th after last season, which was so consistent, the start of this season, which was really quick without many results to show for it, and then a season that's kind of just tailed off for Armstrong, and this kind of encapsulated it. But just a
bad run of races, to make clear. Like,
I mean, obviously,
Road America retirement. Yeah, I mean, he hasn't had a top 10 since Gateway. Like, obviously, there's a lot of retirements in that period, but he's just not driving very well at the minute, which concerns me a little bit considering he's going into a team leader role at MSR next year. I'm
pretty relaxed in it. I think obviously a lot of it has been misfortune, but yeah, we've seen more scruffiness, I think, really since the contract renewal. But yeah, I think just on that kind of gaggle of drivers, Kyle Collette got his first top 10 in 9th, Mick Schumacher his best road and street result in 11th. So some decent days for the couple of rookies. Dennis Hauger his 3rd successive Fast 12 as well in 8th, qualified 8th. So
we'll briefly touch on the cautions before we go over the running order. There was a couple to start off with for debris. I've said this 1,000 times. IndyCar need to introduce a virtuous safety car type system because we just keep on having these ridiculously long cautions. Like, there was a caution for 4 laps for 1 bit of debris. And I know they have to have the whole mantra of opening the pits up and stuff, but it's like, it just takes too long and it just ruins the flow of races that we're having caution after caution for a tiny bit of debris. And obviously a marshal's got to go on the track to take it off, and the problem is if you leave it on there, the car runs it over, it's going to cause a bigger accident. But they just take too long and ruin the flow of races.
What about their adverts, though?
Oh no, what would they do?
American TV things.
There was one ad break where they came back, said there was a yellow for debris, and then just went straight off again. And I was like, if I was American,
the British mind cannot really comprehend it, can they? But yeah, I completely agree. Like, you will pick up a piece of debris that takes 10 seconds and you'll be trundling around in the yellow for another 4 laps after it's been cleared. Like, come on, it's so frustrating.
Yeah. Obviously, the Malukas caution we've touched on, Stingray Rob, was very unfortunate in that just had nowhere to go. And obviously, kind of T-Bone Malukas there. Next caution was for that Armstrong, Rasmussen, and VK incident. VK was very quick to point the blame at Rasmussen, saying whenever he's around, well, when you get into an accident, he later apologised.
He corrected himself, but it does say a lot, and it's funny. We obviously saw at the start of the season with the Fox piece where drivers were saying who they least trust. It says a lot about Rasmussen's reputation.
That's what I was thinking. Like, sure, it wasn't Rasmussen's fault, but it says what everybody thinks of Rasmussen, which I found pretty amusing. Then we had the Palou incident, which we touched on, and then obviously we've touched on the McLaughlin incident. Apart from Rosenquist, who was just randomly had his own spin in the background when he was running in the top 5.
Like I think he said in his Instagram post, "I lost the rear," but it kind of just seemed like he put the power down and the car just went. Like, it was very odd.
really strange. He's having a bit of a. He seems to be very on and off. He either has a great weekend or like a absolute disaster of a weekend. Doesn't really feel like there's any midway to it. It's kind of seems to be the case of MSR. They're very hit and miss.
It's quite Rosenqvist as well. Like it's kind of a bit of the story of his IndyCar career. I think this is kind of. I think he has become more reliable since he's gone to Shank almost, but it is kind of the story of he'll have really high peaks, but then
he's only got 6 top 10s all year in 15 races. It's not very many.
Yeah, I guess so. It is just very, very Rosenqvist.
Yeah, only 2 cars who start in the top 10 finish in the top 10, by the way, which kind of speaks about what kind of race it was. But let's go over the running orders. Kirkwood, Lundgaard, Power, Ericsson, and then the 2 young guns and Simpson and Siegel. Scott Dixon, who had finally returns to the top 10 after that career-long streak in 7th. Newgarden finished in 8th, the first top 10 of his career for Kyle Collette, and Roman Grosjean. Another pretty good day for Roman Grosjean. He was on the Simpson strategy early on, a consecutive top 10 finish on a new street course. So pretty good run there. Dale Coyne Racing generally have just seemed to kind of pick it up in the last couple of races. You obviously mentioned Hauger's had a pretty good qualifying stretch as well. Schumacher 11th, best finish on a road and street course in his career, as you said. He's also said this weekend that he knows what his plans are for next year. A lot of people indicate that might be at Shank Racing alongside Armstrong. Alexander Rossi in 12th with Graham Rahal in 13th. Rahal had a bit of a messy weekend, crashed in practice and then went on an alternate strategy and didn't really work out. So ended up on the lead lap somehow, but he was kind of nowhere for a lot of it. Rasmussen was the first car lap down ahead of Hauger, O'Ward, Armstrong and Foster. Foster dealing with some ankle injury and a little bit of a wrist injury after his crash at Markham last week. He's had a pretty heavy incident. So he kind of said he was just getting the weekend done, like nursing it around, and he wasn't particularly quick, but as we said, it was a very heavy hit, so not really surprised that he gained some sort of injury from it last week.
Yeah, so it's a sprain to his thumb, which is apparently medically diagnosed as skier's thumb, and what they kept describing on the broadcast as a dent in his foot, which sounds not particularly medically precise and somewhat painful. So yeah, I think it was his braking foot as well, and obviously with being such a long race, like Kirkwood came away saying that his hands were hurting from gripping the wheel, and he was, his left calf was genuinely hurting from pumping the brake pedal. So tough one to be, well, I was going to say walking wounded and driving wounded. Like bit of a brutal weekend on the bumps and the length of that race in pretty humid conditions.
And then just to round off, we have Rosenqvist in 19th, Pelot in 20th. For reaching 21st, he had some kind of mechanical failures really early on. You might know what it is off the top. I think it was
gearbox.
Some sort of mechanical failure, put him 7 laps down. Then basically from that point, such a short track, because you have the command blue flag, you're basically just having to go at half the pace because you have to let everybody pass. So that kind of dented his day. And then McLaughlin, VK, Malukas and Rob were all involved in crashes. Okay, so let's go on to our race awards. Let's start off with the unsung hero, and plenty of choice this week. I mean, where do you even... Scott Dixon might be an unsung hero nowadays. Down to the top 10. He's not, don't worry. I'm going to go for Kyle Collette because it feels like our first top 10 has been coming for quite a long time, and a pretty good race to get your first top 10, and a pretty difficult one for rookies. I'll say. I guess the playing field was leveled a little bit by the fact it's a new street course, but pretty good run, qualified pretty well once again, reaching the fast 12. So my shout's Kyle Collette this week.
I mean, there's a lot of contenders this week. I feel like I've had a few recently where there's been not many contenders. So, I mean, Simpson making up 18 places is great effort. Obviously, a lot of that for strategy, and we've actually kind of come slightly used to, as we've said, this happening with Simpson finishing and having these sorts of days. So, not saying anything away, but I'm not going to give it to him. I think Siegel, best career result, would also deserve it, but they both at least got their results. Christian Rasmussen didn't get the results he probably deserved from his pace. So I'm going to give it to him for his qualifying performance and for not throwing it away in the first 10 laps.
We love an outside the top 10 unsung hero shout.
Yeah.
So Roman Grosjean, by the way, deserves a shout. Top 10, actually.
So lots of good drives. Even Ericsson, I feel like for his kind of charge through, didn't get enough plaudits because just good displays all around in that top 10.
So top 3 drivers of the weekend, there is not a doubt that Kirkwood is your number 1. Then it gets
the most emphatic number 1 of the year.
Then it gets a bit trickier.
It's hard. I'm genuine. I'm going to give it to McLaughlin second, I think.
Yeah,
I know he crashed, but I think I just understand the move. Like he raced pretty well, and then
I'd go McLaughlin and Lundgaard.
I guess you've got to go for Lundgaard. Really, there's probably not another option.
And then funny moments. I mean, the one that stands out in my mind was Kirkwood posing with bald eagle on the podium as some random bloke held up this bald eagle for the most American photo shoot you've seen in your entire life.
Yeah, that was funny. There was also in the post-qualifying press conference, Kirkwood asked when Palou arrived, because the front row coming together, but Palou was a little bit later, asked Palou a question about, I think, just how he's so fast in the single car format. And Palou really sincerely said, "Oh, we have tyre warmers." Obviously, he was joking, but I love just how sincerely he said it. But I tell you what takes the cake for me is President Trump's style of waving the green flag. After initially not actually knowing where to hold the green flag, his style of waving the green flag and his facial expression while he was waving the green flag, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the video. If not, watch it. It's frankly ridiculous. I'll leave it at that.
I've got to say, we'll end the President Trump talk after this. There's a video of him and Jamie Little doing an interview about the race. He's got a little bit of wheel knowledge, does Donald Trump. Like, he knows that Roger Penske's got 20 Indianapolis 500s and they almost won it this year and the closest finish of all time. And he claims he watches some of the races. I'm not quite sure how true that is, but Trump is supposedly an IndyCar fan. I said this to you the other day. I quite want to know where his friendship with Roger Penske goes back to, because those two are like inseparable buddies.
I would also say on the funny moment with him waving the green flag, the fact that he was just in the depths of his suite and the race looked like it had already started by the time he was waving the green flag was, ruined the grandeur of the moment a little bit, I think.
I would also say Will Power mentioning Toowoomba Chronicle in his post-race press conference deserves some sort of mention. I think it's the first time that the Toowoomba Chronicle has been mentioned in an international press conference. So credit to Will Power there for shoehorning that one in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, do we want to get on to talking a little bit just about the event in general? I think
so. Let's start off with the track. I think is a pretty good. Like, I know we spoke about a lot of it with Markham last week. I didn't find it very inspiring. Like, I guess it was cool going through all the monuments of Washington, but it was a very IndyCar 90-degree street course where all the corners actually look quite similar. Turn 6-7 was pretty cool. That was pretty challenging, but otherwise I thought it was a pretty...
There's only so much you can do when you're racing around the streets of Washington DC and you want to get all the monuments in. Like, it was a short lap, like not many corners for obviously a very long distance. So yeah, I've not got much to say on it particularly. Like, it was bumpy, there was, a bit of character to it. Like, it was passable, it was fine. The racing was all right. Like, it wasn't amazing. It was fine. Like, I think just everything that surrounded the track is really the talking point there. And actually, just before we get on to speaking about the event more generally, we caught up with Pato O'Ward after the first practice session, just to get his take on some of the biggest challenges of the DC circuit, some of the first impressions there, as well as a little bit on the challenges that face the drivers across such a long race. So here is Pato. Cheers, Dave. Hi, Pato. First of all, like, compared to maybe what you came in expecting about the track from sim or whatever, like, what are some of the different challenges that you encountered in this first session that the track maybe has to offer?
I'd say the biggest, factor that we were considering, but obviously didn't really know how it was going to be, was the bumps. We've got quite a bit of bumps on the exit of turn 1. We've got quite a bit of bumps going into 2 and the straightaway. So I would say that that's taken over a little bit of what, the characteristic of what this track is. And there's certain ones that are, right where maybe the car doesn't love it all the time. So that's a little bit of probably what we're going to be working around.
And then just looking ahead tomorrow, obviously it's a particularly long race. So do you have kind of a different approach for that? Like, do you have survival in mind, knowing what could unfold? Like, how does that change things?
Oh, man. Long race. Obviously, the strategies are going to be all over the place. And, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see how people strategize their push to pass, because we've only got 150 seconds of push to pass and we've got basically 150 laps. So if you use it every lap, you only have 1 second per lap-ish. So Yeah, you definitely don't want to do that. You also want to attack, but you also need to save some towards the end, because there's quite a lot of straightaways where you will see a lot of passing opportunities. So I think it's gonna be a good race.
And I guess if we go on to the event itself, it's obviously made out to be IndyCar's marquish road street event of the year, and ultimately this was a very big opportunity for IndyCar going on the streets of Washington DC. When I think Ray said this earlier in the year, Formula One weren't invited, NASCAR weren't invited. It was IndyCar who had this opportunity to kind of showcase its product, and I've got to say IndyCar did an extremely good job at promoting it, like throughout the Washington suburbs, and giving a little bit of attention to the sport. Obviously, the viewership figure will probably get on the day of release, which would be Tuesday, which would be very interesting to see, because that's ultimately going to be, a big factor into how big of a success this was with the viewership figure. I would say very long race, as you said earlier. It felt a bit too long. Like, obviously, you won't really have this again, but this is the same distance they're doing at Milwaukee next week. And that's on a short oval where you're averaging, 120, 130 miles an hour, not well under 100 miles an hour. So it felt a bit too long for me, is something I'd say. And then obviously it's like the age-old debate whether they're going to bring it back or not. It seems like the government are pretty keen to bring this event back because, without getting too political, I guess it's good for the administration to kind of showcase what they can do in the capital. And like, I know the First Lady of the US was pretty keen to bring it back. I mean, I think obviously it's a controversial event, and without going into the weeds too much of it, I think IndyCar, the alienation of a lot of the fan base is a pretty difficult subject to navigate, and obviously it's understandable why a lot of people might be uncomfortable with an event like this. I think it's also quite cool to have as a one-off for America's 250th birthday, and like kind of the prestige of having it once and having that opportunity once to showcase your product. I think if it becomes a yearly thing, you kind of lose that speciality of it. Like, obviously the argument is it's creating an event like Formula One do very well at places like Miami and Las Vegas, and an IndyCar race at Washington would certainly be an event. It would be the marquee event outside of the Indianapolis 500, but I just don't feel like it would quite be the same in future years. Like, having it on that America's birthday as a celebration of that, and promoting IndyCar as kind of once in a generation street course event was something I quite liked. So it's not something I'm hugely hot on having again. I know some other people are, but yeah, that's just my thoughts on it. Like, I thought it was a great weekend as like a one-off, and I like the celebration as a one-off. What I didn't like was the whole, it's a one and only freedom 250, but we might be back here next year for a shortened race. It just felt a bit weird as a viewer, like not like kind of the uncertainty around it all, which is something, I thought was just a little bit odd listening to the entirety of that weekend.
I'm not totally sure on like kind of my thoughts on the point of bringing it back. Like, I think with it not being the big 250 celebration again, I think you lose a lot of what was maybe a bit of a unifier in the whole event. So I think that's one thing to consider. I also do think on the flip side, in terms of like, being in favor of bringing it back, like, surely given, how big a thing this felt and how good it would be for whoever's exposure, especially if we get a great viewing number or what have you, maybe it wouldn't be so great again. But this does have the chance to become a massive thing that nobody else does, and it's IndyCar's thing. So I think that's just my point there. There's obviously a lot of stumbling blocks to get over, and I'm not sure IndyCar would want to put all of that investment into it again, but there might be someone somewhere who was very keen to pay for it. I guess just to kind of get into this particular event, like, ultimately you can't pretend there isn't an element there of understandable kind of divisiveness or discomfort to it in some quarters. But I think from our particular perspective, like, we throughout the weekend had the job of telling the stories of the sporting side of the weekend. So I hope we were still able to convey that for people who maybe weren't so keen on the event. But I mean, listen, like, IndyCar was made to feel like a big deal this weekend, and that's not been, we can't say that too often about IndyCar outside of the Indy 500. I think to have Washington DC and the National Mall shut itself down for IndyCar is something quite special. Like, I mean, you only have to look at the backdrop that we mentioned. Like, it's damn cool, and it was definitely an opportunity. I mean, the optics are a thing, but it was certainly a new opportunity for partners and new eyeballs both in DC and I guess further afield on TV as well. The free tickets meant there were, I mean, Kirkwood kept mentioning looking out of the car on pace laps or warm-up laps and just seeing rows and rows of people who frankly may never have known about IndyCar. I mean, Bud Denker said the attendance across the weekend was 215,000 across the 2 days. On Saturday alone, $969,000 of merchandise was sold, which is more than Arlington across the entire weekend. And Arlington obviously was billed as this massive opportunity and massive event. So that's pretty seismic. I do take issue with people saying, oh, this is like the 500. I mean, Bud Denker said that the pageantry may have exceeded the 500. And like, whoa, hold on now. Like, nothing is quite like the 500, as obviously we mentioned earlier, Kirkwood was very keen to point out. But I think I think people putting it within that bracket, or at least kind of just beneath the bracket of the 500, putting it in that sense of importance, does kind of speak to something, because it shows what you get when you actually properly invest in promoting and showcasing your product. Because IndyCar this weekend was given a sense of importance with the likes of going to New York City for a big like media tour and lighting up the Empire State Building. Even the pre-race show, like, there was serious production value in that. And I think with the right effort and the right investment, every race could be made to feel that special. I know the stumbling blocks with things like pre-race shows and getting TV windows, but even if you're doing that on, not necessarily on Big Fox, I think that sort of thing is really important to IndyCar to make it really seem and feel of a really high value, which is what this weekend successfully managed to do. And okay, on this occasion, it was done by something very unique, but IndyCar was made to stand out. And how many times have we been able to say that IndyCar was made to stand out? Not that many outside of the Indy 500, which obviously does that so successfully every year. And, ultimately, like, there are all of these conflicting feelings around the event, and I feel those. And that makes it kind of, it obviously makes the weekend a bit of a challenge to cover in some ways. But I think the whole thing was just extremely surreal. Racing on the streets of the capital city of the United States of America, IndyCar doing that. Yeah, I mean, it was impressive.
Yeah, this is what we said a lot. IndyCar needs to create more events, and everyone who seemed to attend the event kind of really made it out that this was a special event. This felt something special, and I'm not going to delve into political weeds too much here because I appreciate that it's a very divisive topic. But at face value, having the most powerful person in the world be involved in IndyCar is something pretty significant. Ultimately, the viewership figure is going to be very important. And I will say I was a bit disappointed throughout the broadcast that there wasn't kind of enough promotion. Oh, look, if you like this, we've got even better racing on a short over next week at Milwaukee. You've got 2 races in a weekend to follow. Then after that, we go to Laguna Seca, another road course. I feel like there wasn't enough of that promotion. Personally, just trying to build momentum into further races, which is what they really struggle at with the Indy 500. And viewership into Milwaukee and Laguna is going to be very important. And that's something I think is very important. Like, it's all good having these events, but you need to harness that momentum, which is something that IndyCar struggled with before. So that's kind of maybe one slight downer I had, but ultimately, what a great opportunity for IndyCar, and it put on a really good show, and that's what's really important to us. And hopefully that was replicated, and hopefully it's got a lasting impact, because ultimately IndyCar are coming up with new and exciting ways to grow and diversify their sport. And whether it was a Nashville football, I know that didn't quite work out, or this, or Arlington, or the video game, whatever it is, ultimately IndyCar and Fox are coming up with solutions to help grow the sport, and it's very encouraging to see that these steps are being taken. And just to end off, like we always do, we're going to round off with our podium prediction tournament and the Fast Six prediction tournament. Let's start off with the podium prediction tournament. I was trying to think about this earlier, actually. Am I right in saying I've won the Fast Six prediction tournament every year, and I won podium the first year and you won it the second year? I think I'm right in saying. I might need to verify that. Yeah,
you're somewhat more successful than me.
We definitely split it last year, and the first year
I think you're right.
Both.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it would be quite bad if this year. It'd be quite bad if this year ends with me having won 1 of 6 and you're on 5 out of 6 of our tournaments. So, yeah.
Well, what I would say is for this podcast's sake, it's good that we've won the Podium Predictor tournament every year. Like,
Yeah.
there's still
reputation
competition as we'll
intact.
get onto in a minute. But exactly, like, it's important for one of us to hold down our own podcast ground and be victorious. Hopefully, we'll say this every year, but we might get more people involved next year. We're just going to have to wait and see, really. But let's start off with the Podium Predictor tournament, as always. Unsurprisingly, a very Kirkwood heavy week. What I am surprised about is there was only one Power and Lundgaard shout. And considering Power's recent form, it's a bit surprising. And Lundgaard's, I know McLaren Street Course package isn't great, but I'd expect maybe more Lundgaard shouts. But anyway, not a high scoring week, but everyone scored at least 2 points. So not a bad scoring week. So let's start off bottom to top. So loads of 2 points. Let's start off with our friend James Scott, who went for Palou, Kirkwood, and Ericsson. 2 points for Kirkwood. On a very similar note, both the writers and the fans went for Palou, Kirkwood, and McLaughlin. Tom Gamewell actually went the same as James: Palou, Kirkwood, Ericsson. So 2 points for all of them, just on the basis of having Carl Kirkwood second. So look, they all count. And then we move on to the people who got 3 points. So both yourself and Will Buxton went for the same Archie with Kirkwood, Palou, and Ericsson. So 3 points there for getting Carl Kirkwood bang on. I actually went on a slightly different route. I went for Palou, Power, and Kirkwood, but I get 2 points for getting Power 1 off and 1 point for Kirkwood being 2 off. So once again, joint top scorer this week alongside yourself and Will. So if we go into the standings, the writers are a long way off in 34. Like, even if they get 9 in the final 3 races, actually, they would still win the title, but yeah, they need a lot. Even then, they might not win the title. So that's how far behind they are. They're kind of really out of it now. Will Buxton's on 40s, 12 off the lead, so got a lot of work to do. And James Scott being 8 points back with 3 rounds to go, you're kind of needing at least one perfect there to get yourself in the mix. So I'll say there's 4 definitely in contention. We'll start off in joint third with Tom and the fans, both on 48 points. Fans, if you want to play along, next week we'll put a story on our Instagram page asking for top 3 predictions for Milwaukee. We'll try and do it a bit earlier than we usually do this week, and we'll see. Well, yeah, we'll see you predict, and you never know, your prediction might be the one that makes the tournament. So both yourself and fans and the Tom are 48. Archie, you are in second with your 3 point week. You're moving up to second by yourself on 49 points. But it's still a little bit of a gap to me at the top on 52. So, again, very much achievable and very much catchable in the final 3 races. So I don't give up yet. Milwaukee is... It's a bit awkward having a we're headed this late in the
High
season.
stakes.
As we said, the IndyCar Championship's over, whatever people might say. But like this is your make or break weekend. So... yeah, it's going to be a very interesting result for the final round of the penultimate round of the year, which is really going to dictate kind of how aggressive or conservative you going to Laguna Seca. Like, if you're 6 points back, is there really any point picking Palou? No, because everybody else is, so you're going to have to kind of send it. Talking of sending it, we're going to have to move on to the Fast 6 Predictor Tournament, which has been a bit of a struggle bus for you all year, Archie, unfortunately. And I think this week is continuing the trend we've basically had all year. So just to recap, we both went triple Andretti. We both went for Alex Palou. We both went for Scott McLaughlin. The difference was you had Felix Rosenqvist and I had David Malukas. So we both got points for Carl Kirkwood, Alex Palou, and Scott McLaughlin, who are top 3 in qualifying. But for race number 12 or whatever of the year, I extend my lead by 1 by getting David Malukas spot on. So a 4-3 victory for me this week.
Yeah, brutally incremental throughout the year.
Yeah, what's the gap now standing at?
So it is 44-36. So it's an 8-point gap.
8-point gap. Whoa. Okay. How does Milwaukee work? Are we going 1 for both races? Are we going 1 for...
I think we may as well go for 1 for each.
You're going 1 for each? Okay. Right, that throws a spanner into the works, which I was not expecting. Okay. Fine. So we'll come back to you our Milwaukee scores. We'll find out how much Archie sends it in just a minute. And yeah, stay tuned. This is going to get really confusing as to how we work this out. Should we just go just race 1 to start off with?
Yeah, sure.
I've gone for your very classic triple Penske for race 1.
I have also.
Palou
also.
I've gone Kirkwood.
I've gone Kirkwood too.
Oh gosh. What's do you think the probability here is of the same?
Probably not that high. I don't know.
Okay, good. Who have you
Rasmussen.
got? Okay. Every week, if it was like we get to the point where we're going the same now, I've gone for Award. So
okay,
we're fine. If we've gone the same for race 2,
I'll eat my hat.
I think this is unlikely.
I think it's very unlikely.
Paloma Malukas
Yep.
for both of them. Kirkwood for both of them.
Me. No.
Okay, interesting. Who have you gone instead of Kirkwood?
I'll put McLaughlin for both of them if you haven't.
I haven't put McLaughlin for both of them.
Okay, fine. Who's
So
the other one you've got the same?
Newgarden. Did I say Newgarden?
Fine.
So my
No.
same ones are Paloma, Lucas, Newgarden, and Kirkwood.
So I've gone Paloma, Lucas, McLaughlin the same.
Okay. And then my other two are Rosenqvist
No, I've got Armstrong now.
and VK.
I've also gone VK. Power is my sixth.
I don't trust Andretti's short oval qualifying being consistent. They've been great in the races, but their qualifying's been all over the place.
Okay, so our battles, O'Ward versus Rasmussen, I think have literally nothing in common.
Both sultans of sketch.
Both have won a Milwaukee race. And considering there's only three of them, that's
Yeah,
actually
yeah,
pretty decent.
Yeah, don't mind that.
Yeah. They've won the first race of a Milwaukee weekend, which isn't hard for Rasmussen considering there was one. But there we are.
Then we've got
and a
teammates.
race, teammates of Armstrong and Rosenqvist, and then Newgarden versus Power, you've just got former teammates, which isn't very exciting, but
Penske roots.
that's it. So interesting. So you can make a gain of 3, but you can also make a bigger gain than that.
So if
hang on,
I
that doesn't
mean, if
work.
I get
'Cause hang on. No, we've done this wrong. Because you didn't put McLaughlin, did you?
not
So
for
we
race
have
two.
McLaughlin versus Kirkwood. So Kirkwood, you've got race 2 as well.
Oh yeah, McLaughlin versus
So
Kirkwood.
McLaughlin versus Kirkwood. Or we could just change it so it's McLaughlin and Newgarden teammates and Power versus Kirkwood. Look
makes
at
more
that. We've got a
sense.
triple teammate battle in race 2
Interesting.
for Fast 6.
So I mean, if I get both bang on, I gain 20 points. That's very unlikely. But
Yeah. But obviously I would gain a very
Stranger things
similar
have
amount. Not a similar amount, but yeah. That I do like this 10-point rule. It puts a bit of jeopardy in there. Like it's never going to happen. We can't really assume our predictions based on, I'm going to get 10 points this week
I
because
think
we haven't got it bang on in 3 years.
it's a good rule to have added because we, as time goes on, are growing increasingly aware of how rare it is.
The first time this is ever done is going to be like a podcast Hall of Fame moment, straight in the end of year highlights.
I genuinely
As
think
soon
it
as
would
happens.
it would usurp whoever wins the actual tournament. The fact that someone gets 6 out of 6.
I feel
winner
like the
would
last
be
couple of weeks,
distraught.
every week we've been like really confident this is the week, and we're just sorry, and that speaks to how unpredictable IndyCar is. So
Yeah,
Credit
I
where
quite like mine
credit's
this
due.
week. I quite like my race 1.
but not your race 2 one.
Race 2, I'm a little bit less confident in. That's got a bit more rolling the dice, but I don't love the Rosenqvist shout. I just don't really trust him in these qualifyings, but we'll see.
Fine. Anyway, that's rounds out our Washington review. Obviously, we're going to have 2 races to review in Milwaukee next week, which is always a very chaotic podcast. So stay tuned for our 2 races in 1 weekend review. Then obviously we head to Laguna Seca to round out the season. So 2 weeks to go. Very, very sad. In the last week, if you haven't caught it, we did catch up with a good friend of the show, Callum Mylott, for the first time in about 2.5 years. So it gives some great insight into kind of his future and his kind of ambitions to return to IndyCar. So definitely give that a shout if you haven't already. Give it a listen. It is one of the longer interviews we've had, but superb insight from Callum on loads of different topics. It's not necessarily just about his future, but we spoke to him about the mark and hairpin and being disguised in Australian and all sorts. So it's a great podcast to listen to, and genuinely, I know we say it's about a lot of guests, but Callum is up there with the most insightful we've ever had on the show. So would 100% recommend you give it a listen. Got a shout out on the Fox broadcast again this week. It was that good. So that's how good Callum was. If you want to have more evidence, second time in 3 weekends, we've got a shout out on the Fox broadcast, which is very, very cool. So well done, Louis and Callum. They're upholding the British reputation very well with their standard of insight on the podcast. One thing we've never said before, which I will shamelessly plug, is I'm told in Spotify every week to remind our listeners to subscribe to the show. So if you haven't already, please subscribe to the show. It would be greatly appreciated by all of us. I don't know what it does, but Spotify keeps on pestering me when I upload it on there. So
there must be a reason why they want you to subscribe. So if you do subscribe, we'd very much appreciate it. If you don't want to, obviously that's no trouble at all. We obviously always hope you enjoy the podcast, and we know the season is coming to an end, but we have plenty of things towards the end of the season. I know YouTube viewers and maybe Spotify listeners will realize I'm in a bit of a different setup this week. Don't worry, this is a one-off, hence why the audio might be a bit dodgy if listening on Spotify, and the camera might not be great, but don't worry, usual surroundings next week. But that's all we've got for Washington. As always, thanks very much for watching, thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.